pick up right where we left off in class, talking about dreams, just to finish out this section material. I want to start out with reminding you that we have to be careful in the way that we define dreams. And whenever we are trying to get information from people about their dreams, especially if we are waking them up after a dream or after a REM sequence, we need to be careful about not saying, "What were you dreaming?" Individuals' definitions of what dreams are vary. And so we have to be careful when getting this information from people that we just ask them, what was the last thing that went through your mind? Versus, what were you dreaming? Because a person might not have considered whatever they were experiencing as a dream. And, considering that and the fact that different disciplines also define dreams differently. In the sleep field, I'm going to give you a couple of definitions that a lot of people agree upon. But again, you'll see some variation across books, across texts, across different fields. So in sleep, we separate non-REM sleep and REM sleep because we find that there is a difference in what we experience as dreams. So during non-REM sleep, you're going to experience shorter kind of more picture specific dreams versus video-like dreams. They're not going to be dramatic or vivid. They probably won't have much of a story, not a lot of emotion. There's not elaboration. They don't tend to be progressive. It just kind of feels like a series of pictures, very mundane. We call this kind of dreaming during non-REM sleep as a non-REM mentation. And this is that version of dreaming. So it just doesn't feel as real as a dream would. And many times if you ask somebody if they're dreaming, they really won't feel like they've experienced a dream during this period. During REM sleep, we do experience more vivid dreams. They feel like there's a story. In some cases, we might feel they feel extremely real. And we end up using the definition of dreaming as this holistic mental experience where we see, for example, characters interacting over a period of time. There's this reality component, and then we can also experience bizarre and vivid images or scenes, and that is really what we define as dreaming. So it's a much more vivid process. It's combining a lot of real reality elements, and in some cases it's hard to distinguish reality. So who dreams? Pretty much everybody. There's about 6% of people who report that they never dream, but when you pull them into the lab and have them hooked up to PSG and then wake them up during REM sleep, a very high portion of them will actually describe dreams and say, wow, I've never been able to remember my dreams. I've never experienced that before. And so they often are very surprised to have that experience. And so it could be that those people, that either the part of the 6% who report that they never dream, or the ones who are, come in lab and don't normally dream, there's some reasons for that. And in about 10 to 20% of the REM sleep wakenings, people aren't going to report dreaming. So it's not an absolute definite that you're in REM sleep and you're definitely going to dream. There's a percentage of time that you're actually not physically dreaming during that time. So part of it is that you're not dreaming. It could be that you do dream and then once you're awoken, you lose it. It's also possible that once you lose that information, that later on during the day, you might actually experience a cue that can get you to remember some element of the dream. So perhaps you had forgotten it upon awakening and forgotten it all day, but someone says something to you or you see somebody and it might actually trigger a memory from a dream from that previous night. So sometimes we can call those back up and sometimes they're kind of lost forever. It kind of depends on the situation. So what's interesting is that a lot of people ask about how do blind people dream and do they experience visual dreams? What do they experience? Because remember that dreams aren't just visual. There's a lot of elements that go into dreaming, especially emotion and sensory input, hearing things, feeling things, a lot of things that are involved in there that's outside of just visual input. So blind people do dream, and depending on if they were born blind or if they became blind during their childhood or adulthood, we actually see people dreaming differently depending on if they became blind or if they were always blind. Turns out that a lot of people who are blind report more aggression in their dreams and also report more transportation themed dreams. So this could be because transportation is such a big deal for people who are blind. They have to be able to get around. So there's a lot of planning that is involved in getting from one place to the next. Even if you're not completely blind, if you're legally blind and have a lot of really hard time seeing, you still need to have a lot of preparation to get from one place to the next because you can't drive yourself. So for those individuals who have been totally blind since birth, they do not report visual images. So instead, they might report dreams consisting of sensory input like taste, smell, touch, and sound. So there's all these elements that they're experiencing in their everyday life. For people who become blind before the age of 5, they don't often report visual images, but you might see a little bit of memory from when they were very young. For those people who become blind between the ages of 5 and 7, you might see some visual imagery, but again, it just depends on how much they remember from prior to being blind. And those who become totally blind after 7 do report visual aspects to their dreams. However, over time, that the frequency of which they're experiencing the visual imagery and how clear that is does tend to diminish over time, because remember, this is kind of going off of their memory prior to age 7. Now, there are some patterns when it comes to adult dreamers. So those adults who recall their dreams tend to find that they're very stable. As you become older, you might experience a reduction in the amounts of aggression that you report in your dreaming and negative emotion. And we find that people dream what's going on in their life. They tend to dream specific milestones. For example, if you get married, a lot of dreams associated with that. If you are graduating from college, you're going to have dreams centered around that. So a lot of the dreams that people recall are very centered around what they're experiencing at the time in terms of their life changes. So, for example, if they are, going through a divorce, they're going to experience very specific dreams to that. For women who work, they tend to have more masculine types of dream imagery, so more aggression, more anxiety, compared to those who do not work or are not in the workforce. So it's really interesting to see some patterns across people. And again, a lot of this falls into what is the person experiencing from day to day, and you can see that kind of manifest through their dreams. So if you look at the difference in aging, you can actually see that, well, of course, people tend to focus mostly on the present, what's going on in their life, life changes that they're experiencing, but you do see a few patterns across specific developmental periods. For example, in younger adults, you might see more dreams that have the theme of guilt and morality. For middle-aged adults, you might see themes that are more sexual in nature and more aggression compared to younger adults. And then elderly adults, you see more death and illness. And of course, this is again reflecting a lot of life changes. People who are, in their 80s might have a lot of friends and people around them, for example, spouses who have passed away. And so death might be something that they're experiencing around them and thinking about more so than, for example, someone in their 20s who's healthy and doesn't have any health complications or conditions. So we do see these patterns reflecting what's appropriately going on during that person's life. Now, when it comes to recurrent dreams, so dreams that you experience on a regular basis, could be the same exact dream or very similar dream that you're having it multiple times. About 50 to 80% of college students do recall recurrent dreams over a period of months to decades. You might find that recurring dream might happen only a couple of times a week, to a couple times a year, to maybe once a year. We find that a lot of times it will center around what's going on in your life. For example, if you have a dream that let's say you're a college student and you have that dream where you have been enrolled in a class all semester and you never went because you didn't realize you were enrolled, and today is the final exam and now you've got to pass the class at the final exam. That's a really terrifying dream. And in that case, a lot of times we see those specific recurring dreams happening around the start of the semester, end of the semester. And so you might only have that dream twice a year, or a couple of times, 2 or 3 times a year, because that's kind of coinciding with the beginning of a new semester. Many times we find these recurring dreams begin in childhood, sometimes in adolescence. Occasionally during the adult years, we start with a recurring dream that follows us for a few decades. I still have the dream about, going to the wrong class, or, not finishing what I'm supposed to for my degree. And so those are things that are kind of recurring dreams for me. And I've actually spoken to a lot of other professors who have very similar dreams. And so that can be reflected into, again, the beginning of new semester. And these sorts of dreams actually began in adulthood, these recurring dreams. Another thing that we find that is common is that a lot of times people have these recurring dreams where they're being chased. So, for example, there could be a natural disaster like a fire, or a flood, or a storm, or a tsunami, and the main character is usually the person who's dreaming, and they're running from this force. And here, I thought this was really funny about kind of making up different sort of characters in your dreams. There's a recurring dream that I've had since childhood that a shark chases me. And so it starts out with these witches, 3 witches standing around a pot, and they're chanting, and I am kind of off to the back, kind of watching them going, uh-oh, and I'm observing them, and then they turn and see that I'm there, and then they somehow summon this shark that chases me throughout the wherever I'm at. It's land. I'm not really sure. But what's funny is that it's a shark on land chasing me. And so I've often thought, how can I visualize this? Because I only ever see it swimming through the air. And so with a very strange Google search, I found a shark with legs. This is not what I see in my recurring dream. It is a shark that's literally floating in air, chasing me, somehow swimming through the air. But I do think it's funny how sometimes we can actually experience new visions and animals that we probably have never experienced before, or ones doing things that they don't normally do, like sharks floating through the air. About 2/3 of these recurring dreams do have a negative effect. It might make us uncomfortable or anxious. And so remember, the difference between a dream and a nightmare is that a bad dream and a nightmare is that a bad dream you don't wake from. You wake up maybe in the morning and go, wow, that was a terrible dream. Whereas a nightmare will actually wake you up in the middle of the night right after you've had the dream. So lucid dreaming is a really interesting concept. So this is basically, you're dreaming, and you, in some cases, can actually control your dream. So about half of the people who have responded to some of the surveys about dreaming have reported that they have had a lucid dream. About 15% say they experience it regularly and about more than once a month. And so what's really interesting about this is that some people have used this as a technique to try to control your dreams, especially if you're going through something or you're having a nightmare, and that nightmare is a recurring nightmare and it's really anxious and scary. Lucid dreaming is a technique where you can kind of gain control of your dream again. And not everybody can lucid dream, but you can actually get better with practice. There are a lot of experts that say that it's probably not a good idea to control your dreams, because whatever's happening in your dreams is something that's supposed to happen kind of naturally. And to, dream naturally is to give up that control. And so lucid dreaming is kind of not allowing that natural process to happen. However, others don't agree and say lucid dreaming is fine, because honestly, most people can't engage in lucid dreaming for more than just a few minutes, even with practice. There's some really neat tools out that you basically have a pair of glasses over your or like a visor over your eyes, and it can signal to you when you're in REM sleep and signal to you when you're experiencing a lucid dream. There's some interesting tools out there. Not all of them have been completely scientifically validated, but If you Google lucid dreaming, you can see that there are things on the market that can help you improve your lucid dreaming and get better at it. So you can then say, well, I want to now fly in my dream because I'm dreaming. But again, it's very temporary. So the question, another question that's common here is, do animals dream? And so we know that the brains in animals and mammals especially are very similar to humans in terms of structure, in terms of functioning. And there are really similar mental processes, for example, emotions, sensory perceptions, and cognitions that animals have that reflect look very similar to how humans process things. And so I think it is a very legitimate question to ask, well, can animals then dream? And we've got a little bit of evidence to support that they do in fact dream. So first of all, if you take a cat and you actually damage the part of the brainstem that will paralyze the body during REM sleep, and remember that during REM sleep, you want this part of the brain to paralyze you during REM sleep so you don't act out your dreams. If you damage the part of the brain in the cats that paralyze you during sleep, meaning that when they dream, they don't experience this paralysis, what we find is that those cats get up and move around and interact with their environment almost like they're awake. And so and the cats are, by definition, sleeping during this time. And so they're acting out their dreams is what we think is happening. It's the same sort of thing that happens with people with REM sleep behavior disorder. And so if there's a damage to the brain where into the particular area of the brain, for example, through trauma or Alzheimer's, we actually see people acting out their dreams. And we see cats during this process of lesioning that particular area, batting at things and walking around, walking into walls and running into things. And it looks like they are experiencing a dream. Another very interesting piece of evidence is that there's a particular gorilla that was taught to communicate through sign language. And the gorilla actually signed the word sleep and pictures spontaneously without any sort of cueing or question. It actually signed both together, giving us the idea that they're actually seeing pictures while they sleep. Again, some evidence to say that they're actually sleeping. So the last thing I want to cover is some dream theories. There are several of them. These are just three that I've picked because I can kind of go over them in a shorter period of time. If you take the summer course, Sleep and Dreaming, we spend a lot more time on these theories as well as others. And so know that, we're just kind of doing a very small portion of dreams in this particular class. But in other classes, we do go much more in depth. So we're going to cover first clinical theories, then the activation synthesis theory, and then finally cognitive dream theories. And so, again, we're just going to do very, very brief kind of explanation of each of these. So some of the clinical theories, one of them is the psychoanalytic approach. So this is works of like Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, French and Fromm, for example, all have their own clinical theories when it comes to dreaming. When it comes to like the psychoanalytic approach in Freud, what we're seeing here is that the unconscious mind, or the id, is in the unconscious area. So if you think of it like an iceberg, right? So you have the big part of the iceberg here that's underwater. If you consider your unconscious here as the very deep, dark, big part that's underneath the water that you can't see, and the tip of the iceberg is your consciousness, and here in the middle is kind of your preconsciousness. If you look at the id, which is your unconscious, sometimes it is able to, according to the psychoanalytic approach, have a pathway through to your consciousness through ways of dreams. So the idea is that you can get at your unconscious and your id, your unconscious desires and needs through the process of dreams. Now, a trained clinician in the psychoanalytic approach would have to be the one to actually observe and interpret what's going on. And so what they do is they take the manifest content, which is everything that you describe. Oh, I was in a car and I was driving here and I did this and I saw that, all that stuff that you can describe as manifest content. And what they do is they take the latent content, which is all the symbolism and all the hidden meaning, and they try to use their training to figure out what it is all about, what it's saying. And so what they'll do is they will try to identify is there a conflict that needs to be resolved. For example, if you if you're dreaming a lot about your mother, let's say you've been fighting a lot with her, or if you have, that might be a conflict that needs to be resolved. Or even deeper into a lot of Freud's work, he had a lot of ideas that were sexual in nature. And so he might say, well, if you're dreaming about your neighbor a lot and you have a lot of phallic symbolism in your dreams in the latent content, then maybe your unconscious conflict and desire is that you want to be with or have sex with your neighbor. And maybe your neighbor is married, maybe you're married, and you feel that it's wrong to do that. And so that's why it's a sort of a hidden desire. And so, the analytic psychologist would work with you and say, well, how can we resolve this conflict? And what sort of compromise can we make to resolve this? Because you're repressing these sexual feelings that you have about this person. So, there's a lot of things in there that they would kind of unpack. And between the different psychoanalytic psychologists, it's debated whether the dreams are concealing or revealing those unconscious desires. And most would probably argue that through latent content, they're trying to reveal. But again, you must have a trained clinician to be able to figure that out. And with these clinical theories, what we find is that, you're going to see these signs and metaphors and symbols, which again are referred to as latent content in the psychoanalytic approach. But they're, clinical theories a lot of times look for these signs and metaphors to try to figure out what's going on in your life and how can we resolve that through the use of your dreams. And so another thing that a lot of the clinical theories kind of go from is looking at how we're able to resolve conflict in our dreams that we couldn't do in reality. And so dreams allow us to experience things that we normally couldn't experience in the real world. So whether that is pursuing a relationship with somebody that's forbidden or off limits, or confronting somebody that you'll never confront, or you're too worried to do. Anything like that, or even fly, or even do things that you're, really daring that maybe you would never bungee jump, but, in your dream you can experience that. And so clinical theories really go along the lines that you can do things that you normally couldn't experience in reality. Now, when it comes to another particular theory, so that was the clinical theories just kind of summed up. There's a lot more there, but that's something that we aren't going to really get into in this particular class. One really interesting theory is called the activation synthesis theory. And so the idea is that it uses the physiology of the brain, the neuroscience about what's going on physically in the brain to describe and explain why it is that we dream. And so some of these theories are more, we dream because we want to, experience life and understand our hidden meanings and all that. And so those are some clinical theories in that. And then some theories are more biologically based. And so the activation synthesis is an attempt to explain dreaming through what's happening in the brain. And so the idea is that during the process of dreaming, you have these REM-on cells that this particular area will activate during REM sleep. And so during this period, what we find is that the particular areas that are activated are the ones associated with awareness, eye movements, obviously for REM sleep, anything related to instinct, vestibular sensation, kind of where you are in your balance, memory consolidation, pre-existing memories, and emotions. And the idea is that if you activate all of these different brain structures, with the deactivation of the primary reception of sensory info, so basically you have all this info moving around in your brain and activating, but you're kind of shut off from the outside world. Your brain has to interpret that. Your brain has to figure out what's going on. So you're not getting any input in from sensory information. You're not getting any light or visual input in. And so your brain needs to kind of say, oh, wow, I have my awareness part is activated, my vestibular sensation memory is activated, pre-existing memory, my emotion parts are activated. All of these areas of the brain are being used, but it doesn't have any context. And there's no sensory input in to explain and put together a story for you. So what you have to do is take that activation and then synthesize it into a unified perceptual whole, because your brain is always trying to make sense of the things around you. And so it'll fill in gaps, it'll make you remember things that didn't happen, in ways to allow you to experience the world in a way that's fluid. And so because the brain's basically made up to do that, and the processes are trying to get you to experience life as a one sort of fluid process, it's going to try to synthesize all these random activated areas into something that makes sense. So this leads to that experience of a dream that's isolated from reality, but it feels really real because your brain's trying to synthesize all these little pieces and parts. Because the sensory content, the vestibular sensations and emotional centers of your brain are being activated, it explains why it's being synthesized as emotional content and sensory content. So even though we don't see you getting auditory information in or visual information in, those particular areas of the brain may be activated. And so your brain is trying to figure out, how do I synthesize this all together? Oh, well, let me synthesize this in the form of basically a hallucination. Put it all together and let's make a story out of it. So dreams are this interpretation of the synthesis that happens. And that explains why all the content is meaningful to just you specifically, because it's consisting of your emotions, your memories, your memory consolidation, everything that happened to you in that previous day is all going to work together for you to be able to figure things out. So this is kind of the explanation of the activation synthesis. There's a lot more that's going on here, but that's just a very basic interpretation. So we have these REM-on cells here that are basically sending all these signals out into the cortex. And so, when it sends a signal to your vestibular system, you feel, oh, I'm running. So, it feels like my balance is that I'm standing upright. When we see the visual center kind of being activated without any sensory input in, maybe that's seeing pictures of woods, right? And so you have all these, the motor areas and the all these different frontal areas being told that there's information that's flowing from your the firing of the cells in your pons. Your brain has to then synthesize that all together, and then it puts the story together. Oh, I'm running through the woods. That's what's happening, and that's where the dream comes from. Now, there are some criticisms of this, of course, and so one is that it's just too neurological to describe the full process and experience of dreaming. So a lot of people don't like it because they say it's just too formal and it's too neurological and descriptive. A lot of the work that's based off of the theory comes from animal work. So again, there's this question of translation, and if the animal work is translated properly to human, and if that is not the case, then the theory kind of crumbles in terms of its foundation. Now, there is some evidence that suggests that the instigation of dreaming, so it starts in the cerebral cortex, not the brainstem. So if we look here, I'm going to go back just a second. If we look at it starting here in the cortex and not in the brainstem, this actually, it it destroys the theory quite a bit, because that means that we don't see that it beginning in the brainstem in the REM-on cells. However, not all the evidence suggests this. Only some of the evidence suggests that it's the cerebral cortex. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to see, is this actually, do we actually have support for this? Another criticism and issue is that some people, there are people who are in REM sleep but actually don't dream. And people dream outside of REM sleep. So if it's just the REM-on cells, neurons that are initiating this, then the problem is that it doesn't explain non-REM sleep mentation. It doesn't explain why we don't dream every single time we are in REM sleep. So again, there are some criticisms when it comes to this particular theory, but it is a good explanation and attempt. Now, cognitive dream theories, which is a whole new set of theories, is, remember, cognition and cognitive psychology is all about comparing the brain to like a computer. So this is information processing. And so their approach, a cognitive psychologist and cognitive dream theories approach, is that not as brain processing of perceptual experiences, but the brain is experienced dreaming as a type of cognition. So it's a separate process. And so the explanation is that, during sleep, we consolidate memories, we go over everything that we covered the day previous, we are going over all of the things that we experience, and the idea is that we're reprocessing memories, we're reprocessing the knowledge that we gathered throughout the day, and our brain has to do something with this. And so it uses the same basic methods during the dream state as it does when the brain, when you're awake and conscious. Now, the focus of dreaming for cognitive dream theories is more on the content, the sources or significance. The focus is more on the process of dreaming than the actual content, sources, or significance. People who, really feel that the cognitive dream theories are where it's at and good explanation aren't looking at symbolism. They're not saying, oh, let's look at what you're dreaming. Let's just look at the process of what's going on in the brain as you dream. And so the idea is that there's no hidden meaning. There's no secret sort of code. They don't really care too much about exactly the significance of your dream or where it comes from necessarily, but that process of dreaming. So there's no unconscious motivation, so it's very different from the psychoanalytic perspective. There's no hidden meaning. The clinical approach, there's no translation here. It's no figuring out, oh, what do you mean when you dream this sort of thing? And so the interest in studying dreams using the cognitive dream theory or in the category of cognitive dream theories is looking at what is going on during sleep or dreaming, and how does that compare to when you're awake? And so there's some really good evidence to suggest that this process here, that the process of dreaming with the reprocessing of memories and the knowledge, there's a lot of evidence to support that this is indeed what happens during our dreams and during our sleep process, is that the brain is going back through those memories. And so there's evidence to support this line of theories. So that's kind of the cognitive dream theories in a nutshell, is just there's no hidden meaning. You don't need a specialist interpreting your dreams because there's really nothing to interpret. This is just what process is happening during dreams and how does that compare to when you're actually awake and conscious. Now, so the final thing that I want to cover when it comes to dreaming is just some myths, because these are very, in some cases, very well known. Some of these are rather silly, but these are kind of interesting. So one is that people only dream in black and white. And I think this comes from the issue of some people trying to remember really vivid details, and some people struggle with that. And so they think I only must dream in black and white because I can't think of me dreaming specifically in color. But this is a myth. We do dream in color, and many people will report very vivid color, very bright colors. Another myth is that eating spicy or exotic foods will cause you to dream more or may cause you to have bad dream. What's interesting about eating spicy or exotic foods is that a lot of times it upsets your stomach or it gives you indigestion. And so if you're uncomfortable, you're going to be more likely to be pulled out of different stages of sleep. You're going to be more likely to wake up during a REM sleep period. And if you're dreaming during REM and you wake up, you're actually much more likely to recall what you were experiencing. So you're not necessarily dreaming more, you're just recalling more dreams because you're waking up more during the night or you're getting pulled out of sleep. So it's more of a discomfort thing than it is with actually the food itself. One thing that's really kind of funny is that some people ask the question, well, if you dream that you're falling and if you you only wake before you hit the ground, but if you hit the ground, does that mean you die? And so the problem is that there's no way to really test this, because if you did in fact die, then we wouldn't know because you'd be dead, and you couldn't tell us. So I think that there are people that have reported that they have experienced hitting the ground in a dream, and they're still alive to tell the tale. So I don't think this is true, and if it is, it'd be next to impossible to actually test, unless we can ask dead people if they did in fact have that dream. Another really interesting one is that you can use sleep talking and hypnosis to get people to tell you what they're dreaming or what they're experiencing. And this is just not true. You can't be hypnotized unless you want to be hypnotized. And with sleep talking, people generally speak gibberish when they talk in their sleep, or it's very mundane. They're not, as they're not going to hold on a conversation in the same way. It tends to be, they're not really paying close attention to what you're asking them. So it's really difficult to actually get any information from somebody who's sleep talking. And usually it tends to be very difficult to understand anyway. So there is no sort of secret key to getting into people's minds and getting all their secrets through hypnosis or sleep talking, because generally people aren't going to be forward with information that they don't want to tell you. So that's basically it. That's a summary of the last part of what we covered. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email me with anything that you have questions about.